Welcome back to PhiloByts. Today we meet the most elegant and unsettling skeptic in the history of philosophy, a thinker who followed empiricism all the way to its breaking point and in doing so challenged how we understand science, morality, religion, and even ourselves. His name was David Hume. David Hume was born in 1711 in Edinburgh, Scotland, into a modest, noble family. His father died when he was just 2 years old, and he was raised by his deeply religious Presbyterian mother. He entered the University of Edinburgh at around 12 and quickly stood out for his intelligence, but not for his piety. His mother once described him as a fine, good-natured lad, but uncommon weak-minded, meaning not that he was foolish, but that he seemed almost incapable of religious belief. From an early age, Hume trusted reason more than tradition, and he followed it wherever it led, even when it led him away from what everyone around him believed. At just 23, he completed his first major philosophical work, a treatise of human nature. He published it anonymously in 1739, hoping it would make his reputation, but it failed so completely that he later said it fell dead-born from the press. He would later rework its ideas into the Inquiries, which were far more readable and eventually brought him recognition, though he never secured an academic position. His skepticism about religion made him essentially unemployable in universities of his time, so instead he worked as a librarian, secretary, and later became a highly respected historian. In Edinburgh, he was known as Le Bon David, cheerful, sociable, and widely loved even by people who strongly disagreed with his philosophy. Hume begins from a very simple but radical idea. Everything in the mind comes from experience. And experience, he says, comes in two forms. Impressions are immediate and vivid. What you see, feel, hear, taste, or suffer. Ideas are just faint copies of those impressions. Memories, imagination, reflections. You can imagine a pink elephant, but only because you've already experienced pink and elephant separately. From this, Hume develops a kind of philosophical filter. If you can't trace an idea back to an impression, then that idea is probably meaningless. This principle is often called Hume's fork, and when you apply it seriously, a lot of traditional philosophy starts to collapse. Take causation, one of the most fundamental ideas in science and everyday life. We say things like, fire causes heat, or that dropping something causes it to fall. But what do we actually observe? We observe one event, then another event repeatedly. We see constant conjunction, A followed by B, but we never actually observe a necessary connection between them. We never see the must that supposedly binds cause and effect. So Hume's conclusion is striking. Causation is not something we discover in the world. It is something the mind builds. After repeatedly seeing A followed by B, our mind becomes conditioned to expect B when A appears. Causation then is habit. This leads directly to one of his most famous arguments, the problem of induction. We assume the future will resemble the past. The sun has risen every day so far, so we expect it will rise tomorrow. But Hume points out that there is no logical justification for this belief. We cannot prove that the future will resemble the past without already assuming it. So science, which depends entirely on induction, rests on a foundation that cannot itself be proven rationally. We trust it because it works, not because it is logically secure. This problem would deeply influence later thinkers, especially Immanuel Kant, who famously said that Hume awoke him from his dogmatic slumber and forced him to rebuild philosophy from the ground up. Hume applies the same method to the idea of the self. We normally think of ourselves as one continuous identity, the same I that existed yesterday and the same I that will exist tomorrow. But when Hume looks inward, he never finds this self. He only finds individual perceptions, sensations, thoughts, emotions, memories, desires. There is no impression of a permanent self behind them. So what we call the self is actually just a bundle of perceptions, a flowing sequence with no fixed core, no soul, no stable inner subject, just the stream of experience itself. This idea would later resonate with modern psychology and neuroscience, where the mind is often described not as a thing, but as a process. In morality, Hume makes another radical move. He argues that reason is not the source of moral judgment. Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions. In other words, reason can tell us how to achieve something, but it cannot tell us what we should value in the first place. When we say something is wrong, we are not describing an objective fact like in science. we are expressing a feeling of approval or disapproval. This leads to his famous is-ought problem. You cannot logically derive a moral ought from purely factual statements. Facts describe what is, values express what we feel should be. However, this does not make morality arbitrary. Hume argues that humans share natural sentiments, especially sympathy, the ability to feel what others feel, and these shared emotional structures form the basis of moral life and social order. Hume is equally skeptical about religion. In his essay of miracles, he argues that a miracle, defined as a violation of natural law, is always less probable than the possibility that human testimony is mistaken or deceptive. Our evidence for natural laws comes from uniform and repeated experience, so it is always stronger than isolated reports of extraordinary events. In the dialogues concerning natural religion, he also critiques the argument from design. Even if the universe appears ordered, Hume suggests that we have no basis for assuming it was created by a perfect, intelligent designer. The universe might not resemble a machine at all, and even if it had a cause, we cannot infer anything reliable about the nature of that cause. These arguments would later echo in scientific and philosophical debates that eventually moved toward evolutionary explanations of complexity. Hume's influence is enormous. He reshaped philosophy of science by exposing the limits of induction, transformed moral philosophy by separating facts from values, and destabilized metaphysics by questioning causation and personal identity. Immanuel Kant responded directly to his challenge, and much of modern philosophy of science still operates in the space Hume opened. Even today, discussions about causation, probability, and scientific certainty carry his influence in the background. His philosophy is often seen as destructive, but its deeper lesson is intellectual honesty. Believe what the evidence supports, not what is comforting or traditional, and recognize clearly when certainty ends and habit begins. That kind of clarity is rare. Thank you for watching. Next time, Jean-Paul Sartre and existentialism. Freedom, responsibility, and what it means to exist without excuses.